The Pharisee did all the right things. He fasted, he prayed, he paid tithes on his income. He did all that was asked of him. Is there anything wrong with this? The tax collector, by his own admission, was a sinner. Tax collectors were known for their graft. They often collected 3 or 4 times from the people the amount that the people owed. The tax collector would keep the difference between what was owed and what they collected. It's obvious that the man had much to confess. The Pharisee even pointed this out. The Pharisee said, "O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector." Again, I ask, is there anything wrong with what the Pharisee was saying? A parish in Suffield, Connecticut had a program during Lent one year where during one session the people were asked to write their own obituary as how they wanted to be remembered. Then they were to go home and have someone else write their obituary. Once back at the meeting the following week, they were to read the 2 obituaries and compare the differences. Some of the people remarked how surprised they were that the obituary they wrote was very different than the one the other person wrote about them. The people discussed how their view about themselves differed from how others saw them. It was an eye-opening experience for some who never even considered that the face they showed the world was not the face others saw. This exercise helps to point out the main difference in the 2 men in our gospel tonight. The Pharisee saw himself as a righteous man who did everything right. He did not think he had anything to confess, and that he was nothing short of a shining example to all the people who knew him. What he failed to see was that just by the way he presented himself, he was a subject of talk for his lack of humility. He was the type of person that placed himself first, the one who held himself up as an example of all that is good with God. He would possibly be in the group of people that once saw the obituary that others wrote about him would not be able to deal with the differences in what he wrote versus what was written about him. My wife's grandmother, Julia, had many sayings that seemed to fit most occasions. I'm reminded of one that seems to fit well here for someone like the Pharisee and generally for people who hold themselves in very high esteem. She would say, "He thinks he's great. He thinks he's grand. And at the movies, he holds his own hand." Maybe it's one we could keep in mind when our egos get the best of us. The tax collector, on the other hand, knew of his faults, his shortcomings. Anything anyone wrote of him, he would most likely not only believe what was said, but take steps to correct his uncharitable behavior. This man had a sense of humility and did not raise himself to the highest position at events as the Pharisee did. This man didn't show a false sense of humility either. He actually believed he was a sinner, and he asked for forgiveness for such a life. This is why the gospel states that he went away justified or made righteous in the eyes of God. The tax collector had a realistic view of what was going on and what he really was. He would not be afraid of what anyone's opinions of him were. A main point is not that we should be comparing ourselves to others or one person against another, but that these 2 men were at opposite ends of the spectrum and that we all fall somewhere between the 2. This act of comparing people is making a judgment just like what the Pharisee was doing. The Pharisee only looked to himself for judgment. The tax collector not only admits his sins, but looks to God for forgiveness and mercy. In this named year of mercy, we are reminded to seek out that which leads us to asking and receiving God's mercy and then extending it to others. We are nearing the end of this special year. Have we taken advantage of what God has given, or are we still not reaching out for mercy and then being charitable with that mercy? We have to see ourselves not only as we wish to be, but as others see us, and work to make the two versions complements of each other. The tax collector could do this, and that's why the tax collector went away justified. Only he recognized himself as he really was, someone who needed God's forgiveness. The Pharisee was not relying at all on God. He thought he was doing fine, everything by himself. His actions, his words, they all spoke only of him. We all fit somewhere in that spectrum between these two men. The part we have to deal with is the one where we must see ourselves for who we are and recognize the help we need from God.